Let the church say amen.
Amen.
I resist. I apologize. I know better. I know better. But I am absolutely grateful because for me, academe has been a refuge, and academe has been a sacred place for me, in which I have grown over the past 2 decades, intellectually, but also spiritually. I would like to thank Dr. Patterson, Dr. Waters-White, Dr. Dunstan, Dr. Akinila, and Reverend Beggs for their thoughtful presentation. Again, this is in preparation for the February 2013 conference, so we are gaining speed, not slowing down, as you can see with our panel. At this time, we will open it up for discussion. So please stand and state your name and ask a question to the panel.
For the question of the 21st century. So I appreciate it because we have become very mindful of voices, thoughts, and we say. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Definitely enjoyed the panel. My name is Hall, doctoral student in African American Studies. I guess my question would be to anyone on the panel, and I don't mean to be crass when I ask, but I definitely think Dr. Bois was an intellectual. And I know that many young people today working in Atlanta public schools just aren't reading the Bois. Just doesn't speak to them. They're not reading his books. In many schools, it's not a part of the curriculum. We know that we live in a society where pop culture and many of our young folks has taken over. So how can someone use the Bois to reach young folks today?
I don't think you can just say young people today. I think we have a habit of we want to really whatever period we're in, we vilify whether it's young folk or whatever in that period of time. Truth is, nobody ever read Du Bois, right? Young people didn't read Du Bois when I was a younger person, right? So the problem is not that somehow this set of young people are less focused on what's important in the world than another set of young people, right? So, I mean, we just should be real clear about that. Dr. Du Bois was never some big popular, cultural icon, right? Even when he was alive, he was more often than not in a minority, But as to the question of how, that question is how do we make the thinking of black scholars accessible to a wider community? That's where we get creative. If you're a teacher working in that area, make that introduction. Find creative ways to introduce those ideas. I think the thing that's probably coming out of this seminar is that the research and the work of Dr. Du Bois is not old stuff. It's not unusable stuff. We can relate the information that he talks about, for instance, in terms of black family studies in 1908 to black family studies in 2012. We can make those relationships. If there's research and study to be done, making those connections. It doesn't necessarily mean that, say, a 10th grader is going to read this whole thing. Or what was that really big one? Was that the one in the church? They're not going to read all of that, but you can take out important pieces and then make connections to, wow, something that's happening situationally today. When a conversation comes up about how terrible young black girls are for having all these babies today, put this report about so-called illegitimate births that Dr. Du Bois does on the black family. Say, wow, what do you think about this? A man named W.B. Du Bois said this in 1908, and they listed this. Wow, how do we talk about that then? So I think, we make relations to what goes on now, because I think what this seminar has shown is that this research is still pertinent and significant today.
Two things we do here at Clark Atlanta that I really appreciate. Souls of Black Folks is on the reading list of the freshman class when they enter. I think that's critical. And also, in our discipline, in religion, religious students cannot study the history of the black church without reading Bois. I mean, he was the first to do a sociological analysis of it. So they have to read that. So sometimes it can be made, discipline specific, and then it can be branched out to the class as we do with our freshman class.
I'd also like to address that briefly. Mary McLeod Bethune wrote that as academics, our job is to translate the thoughts of the thinkers into the language of the workers. And I think that there's too much of a problem in academia of that separation of town and gown, wherein the experts are in the academy and we go out to the community to help them solve their problems. These things have been addressed through what's called community engagement, community service, service learning, and community-based research. I think here at Clark Atlanta University, it's imperative to understand the history and the origins of historically black colleges that have that as part of their purpose of education. So, as Dr. Akanyele pointed out, in African American studies, the foundation of the discipline is an application. It came out of community activism, and it is grounded in community activism. That is the sole nature of African American studies as a discipline. I would argue that that's also extended to understanding historically black colleges. They came out of community activism, and as was clearly pointed out by Dr. Dunstan, I believe that the church was the foundation of the school, right? That we must, as historically black colleges, remain grounded in community activism. I argue that anyone who's not reading Du Bois from the perspective of a historically black college will truly not be reading Du Bois. They will not understand the origins of his scholarship, the value of his scholarship. They will continue to read him as a Northern scholar and read him from Harvard, which is to say that they'll miss Fisk and they'll miss Atlanta University and the grounding of what went into the NAACP, as was pointed out.
Can you speak up some, sir? My name is James Kelly. I'm a graduate student here in the Department of Sociology here at Clark Atlanta University. My question is as sociologists, we've noticed the movement away from the black church as the central tenet of black life, and more to a secular notion of almost prosperity. Black people are focused on their economic needs. What do you feel Du Bois would say about this departure from the black church, and what can the black church do today to help basically bond the black family, because the black family has been disintegrated for a couple of generations now. So what would Du Bois do as a solution to our problems in the 21st century?
Mr. Kelly, like you, I have a background in sociology as well as history, and that is one of the things that attracted me to the study of the black church. Actually, when I started graduate school, I didn't know exactly what I was going to focus on, but I said it was going to either be the black family or the black church. I started out in my master's program looking at the black family, and then for my dissertation and my doctoral program, I focused on the black church. And I think what Du Bois would say is, especially after reading these works together, is that he sees that they go hand in hand. That you can't separate one from the other, even as you would try. And, I close with this quote where he talks about when the black church and the black home both sort of live up to their expectations, and that when they sort of assume the responsibility for what they're called to do, then we will begin to see a change. When he looks at the study of the black family, he sees it as being important, but he also understands that there are individuals within the black family that will never have the opportunity to go and get an education in 1908, but they'll go to church. And if you go to church, you might not ever earn a degree, but you'll have some level of instruction, some level of education. And essentially what he's saying is that they tie in. And for us today, one of the challenges of the Black church is that it is repeatedly being criticized for its failure to be accountable. But that is changing. There is change within the Black church. The focus on self, the focus on prosperity, it's not exclusive, and there's also the reality that for many people, prosperity is something that is very subjective. So what one group identifies as prosperity in an economic sense could be related by or interpreted by someone else as prosperity in what many would call sort of the abundant life. And I know that because that's my dissertation. But I do believe he feels that they are in relation. And it's also, I guess, not just a shameless plug for the Du Bois Conference, but also for my own research related to the Du Bois Conference, which looks at this transition between what would Du Bois say about the contemporary Black church and the Black family today. So.
Yes. Again, I think the real power of this research is it's really on the ground research. I think first, and I'm going to make an assumption because this is me saying it, but I'm going to put it on Du Bois too. He would disagree with your contention that the Black family is disintegrating. And I know a lot of people say that, and that's the doom and gloom story, and that's the popular discourse, right? But that's, families have always been disintegrated. Since we come out of church 1,000 years ago, families consisted of a dude and 4 or 5 of his wives, right? No, families transform, and that's what we're experiencing now. You can't expect Black families to live today as they did 100 years ago with Dr. Du Bois. Their economic, social, contextual conditions. And so families are transforming. Even ways of having relationship are transforming. Marriages don't look today the way they did 100 years ago, 200 years ago. I think it becomes a part of the doom and gloom discourse, which is imposed on Black people. Always Black people are the most pathological. We're the worst of everything or whatever. No, we are also impacted by social context and conditions. So what we see are Black families transforming, and we don't quite know what the next step will be like, but Black families won't disappear, but I think in terms of the church, I think that, again, Dr. Du Bois constantly shows, he argues for the support of the community through the church and vice versa. And I think in the same way, even though, yes, there are churches that have gotten caught up in what I call vulgar individualism, I think that at the heart within Black churches, there's a hold on to the best of what Black church has been, which I think the importance of that research about community uplift. I think we, as researchers, we can take an example of that. It's easy to find what's wrong in Black communities. It takes some scholarship to find those things that are working, and I think that's what that work did. It pointed out, wow, this is where Black folks are taking care of themselves, self-determination, self-reliance. I think we can find actually a lot of that even today within Black churches. We can find Black churches that are still the centers of economic, social, educational life within Black communities as the Black family makes its transformation.
Did you have a follow-up?
Can't hear you over there, buddy.
Yeah, you say
When I say disintegration, I don't know if I'm using the exact term I want to use. I don't want to say disintegration. But in recent studies, we see that single-parent homes have gone up. So we're talking about a transformation from a two-parent system where there are 2 parents in the home to I'm the product of one family, a one-parent home.
You're doing pretty good.
I'm doing pretty well. But this is becoming a normative standard. 47%, the last study I read, 7% of homes are single parent mothers in Black families. So and it was 72% of married couples in the 50s and 60s. So that's what I'm talking about, this downside of marriage. And we see these new families being created, but we don't see the same commitment of 2-parent homes. So, but is the church somehow working towards having marriage counseling, having these things, keeping our institutions of marriage, keeping our institutions of the family intact. Because, I mean, as a sociologist, especially living in Atlanta and coming from Detroit, these are the things that I see.
I appreciate what you're saying. I would still, as a graduate student, brother, I would push you to consider this idea. All right, oftentimes we get caught up in other people's definition of who we are and what we are. What you just described was, again, a shift in sexual relationships and marriage, right? But again, you know, in terms of what is the notion of family amongst black people? When I think about my family, I ain't just thinking about me and my wife, right? I'm thinking about, my grandson was asking me this morning to list all my cousins and all my TTs and all that, right? So my family is much broader than that. And again, in that sense of extended kin networks, relationships, our families are not disintegrated. Yes, just like just about everybody else in America right now, marriages are at about 50% success rate. All right, but again, that's everybody being impacted by what? Mobility, being impacted by economic conditions. People don't think about marriage the same way. People are not as hung up on getting married or not in the same way. So again, those ideas are transforming over time, but it's not the end of the world. And also, you know, as I said, I wasn't joking. You look like you did pretty well. So even though you grew up in a so-called single-parent household, I'm gonna bet you had some other relationships around you. You had some cousins, you had some uncles, some aunts, you know, somewhere, you know, or you had, okay, you're gonna fake me out. You had some, what they call faux kin, some fake kin, or something around, right? But my main point there is, I think as scholars, right, you know, we have to really be careful that we don't allow ourselves to be defined by the legal definitions of a society that has dominated and oppressed us for so long. You see, legally a family in America is a man and a wife who have sex and have a baby. You're not a family until you have sex and have the baby, all right? And then you gotta stay in the same house. For me, a family is much more than that. From an African-centered perspective, family is not what we call, well, not even nuclear. It's even more than that. It's really what we call a conjugal family. In other words, European idea of family is based in conjugality, having sex. All right? Whereas black folk, for the most part, our idea of family is based on what we call consanguinity, in other words, blood relationships. And since this enslaved experience, it's also based on appropriation. You know, I got a lot of play brothers and sisters also who are part of my family. That's a much broader idea of what family is and what family means than two people having sex and having a baby. And so as we do the research, how do we use that to help us understand the condition of families at this time? You know?
And that is why Herbert Aptheker wrote The Black Family, Enslavement and Freedom in a response to the Moynihan Report, because the Moynihan Report was based in an assumption of pathology because there was this phenomenon called the single black mother. And it was this is an awful, horrible, evil situation of these black women being single mothers and the men are absent and they're, so that the presumption was pathology, right? And so how do we look at the family structures and Aptheker was really just writing, saying, where are the origins of the differences, in black families, as we can understand it from the context of enslavement, but not just starting there, but looking at African family systems. And so how do you get all these different variables that impact it? How do you separate out all the variables so you're not conflating things, which in order to do that, as we said, you have to take different assumptions in your questions. People can look at the same data, but if your questions assume pathology, then your answers are going to have that. I think we have time for one or two more questions. One here, one here.
Okay, hello, my name is Rebecca Chapman. I'm a doctorate in African Women Studies. And my question, I believe, is for Dr. Johnson. Okay, you spoke about the two souls very briefly, but I wanted to know if you could develop that a little bit more. How I understand the double consciousness is more of a psychological aspect in terms of socialization and social expectations. So when you talk about the dual soul you mentioned, I want you to explain that. I have 3 questions regarding that. So the first one is, if the soul is inherent into our being, then how can it be dual in the sense of social expectations? And then 2, is it possible to develop the soul if the soul in its nature is of the divine? And then the third question is, in the development of the soul, does it allow for diversity in the expression of the divine in various forms? Thank you.
Wow. How much time I got left? Actually, I think your comment, I think you grasp what I believe I was trying to convey, what I believe Du Bois was conveying in using the object term soul, that it is an inner, it's a deeply spiritual concept. You're absolutely right. In academia, it has become more psychological and existential. But I think what he was saying is that there's a sacredness within us that we're missing. We're missing because we're not conscious of this duality within our soul. We believe that man is a spirit. He lives in a body, and he possesses a soul. And most of our psychological issues derive from our soulish man. But it's all a part of who we are. And because academia has really, what I believe, missed the spiritual significance of that, and because me being a religious, obviously I would look at it from that perspective. But it is deeply sacred. It is a part of our God nature. But this duality that he talked about is that it wars with being black and being an American. Paul said it like this: when I would do good, evil is always present. I'm in this constant battle every day with my flesh and my spirit, my flesh and my spirit. So my point was, it's a deeply spiritual concept that academia missed because they chose to enforce the psychological nature of it. But if we can cause black people in particular to go back and deal with the inner self, I think that's what Du Bois was saying, character. We got some inner stuff that we got to deal with as a result of our existential situation, particularly in America. So I know I didn't address all of that, but.
But do you think that as a dichotomy, as either these 2 opposing forces?
Yes, that's how he described it, 2 warring ideals. Exactly. Thank you.
And I think that, I agree with you. And one of my graduate students actually the other day was asking about that. I guess they were in a class of largely non-Africana studies students, and since we're not an HBCU, right? And people they were struggling over the meaning of what they were struggling over was the part that precedes that, where Du Bois says the Negro is sort of like a 7th son, born with a veil. And I think that really emphasizes your point, that I think Du Bois was making a spiritual point. Even though, as a therapist, I'd say I can also see the psychological part of it, but I think he saw a special, he was saying that black people have a special spiritual power because of this actually bad experience of two-ness, but that it also gave black people a special power. He says, having a sort of second sight, the ability to see stuff. And again, because I like this, I really imagine Du Bois as being this person who kind of predates all the stuff that we do when we talk about postmodern studies, right? Now today we talk about the outsider within experience. This is really an outsider within. In other words, black folk can see stuff about white people that white people could never see about themselves, and see stuff about themselves. And yeah, but I agree. I think the spirituality is right there in how he contextualizes it.
Final question.
Hello, my name is Cecily, and I just wanted to say several people on the panel pointed out the similarities of African and African American worship styles, but didn't say anything about the major shift in the substance of the worship. Did Du Bois say anything about the major force shift to Christianity here in America? Did he say how that impacted the Black church? And does anyone on the panel have an opinion on is there room in the social structure created by the Black Christian Church for the atheists, the humanists, and that sort of thing?
Can you restate, just the two points, can you restate the question? And slower, because I think there was a lot in there, there's people unpacking it. Can you stand and restate the question? Yeah.
The last part of it.
Oh, that's the last one. Well, is the part where I say, is there room in the social structure created by the Christian Church for the atheists and humanists and such? Or was it before?
That's a good question. And you a graduate student?
No.
Okay. And I was going to say to the brother earlier who asked the question, anytime a problem emerges in your spirit as a graduate student, that's usually a good indication that you need to be doing some research. You raised the issue of Black people leaving the church. As a sociologist, it's going to be critical to analyze that and see the impact that that's going to have on the Black community. PBS is doing a series next month on the current state of Black spirituality, and I'm going to be on that panel, and they're looking at humanism. They're looking at there's an emerging Black atheist community. So again, the transformation that we're involved in this world is bringing in all of those forces, those components, and obviously religion being the foundation of who we are, I believe, as Black people. We got to deal with all of that. There's going to be atheists on the panel. I can't wait to sit with her because it's just interesting to me how a person of African descent can be an atheist. It's just interesting to me, but all of that is in the soup now, and we unpacking all of that.
I think, again, talking about, I believe it's important as scholars to always, when we're looking at Black culture, to always, first of all, look at the best of who we are and who we have been. And I think in the best of who we have been, we have, whether it on the continent itself or in the context of the New World, we have been welcoming people. The Black church at its best has always been a welcoming church, at its best. And I don't mean there ain't been some bad days. Has always been an open place. My first adult church experience, like a lot of folk of my generation, I left the church for a very long time, from about 16 to about 30, doing social political activism. I came back into the church through a very politically active church in Los Angeles, California, very African-centered church in Los Angeles, California. And in that church, there was folk who was Muslim, right? There was folk who were atheists. There were folk who actually practiced traditional African religion, right? The church maintained its presentation of the gospel, but it welcomed all those people. And what they came because the church was doing what the Black church at its best has been. It was a cultural, political, social center for the Black community. And even through that, many of those people also transformed some of their spiritual ideas and beliefs, right? But again, because it was a welcoming space that did not do what we often see in Black Eurocentric churches or white churches, which focuses on what we call orthodoxy. In other words, right thinking. If you don't think right or don't think like us, you're not welcome here. I think at its best, the Black church has focused on what we would call orthopraxis. In other words, what you do. If you don't act right, you can't come here. But if you act right, we can work with your thoughts.
And on that note, and I think that was an excellent question because it does get into the limitations of research and how you can say limitations of research and Du Bois in the same sentence. It's unfathomable, right? No, that's part of our job, is to interrogate Du Bois and his research as much as we celebrate Du Bois and his research. And so that begs the question of the limitations of these particular studies really focus on Black religion as Christianity without an interrogation of Muslim or Black Buddhists, or there are such a thing, and I'm sure they just haven't sprouted up out of nowhere, as well as atheists and others. And I think that's part of our responsibility, is to identify the areas that Du Bois covered the ground extremely well, but also identify the areas that are left for us to do as contemporary researchers to advance that work. So thank you very, very much to the panelists. Thank you to the attendees. And we will see you next month, where the topic will be on November 30th, business and economics. We will take a break in December, and in January we will come back with the theme of education, leading up to the February 20th through the 23rd, 2013 Du Bois Conference here at Clark Atlanta University. Take care.